Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy's for try it again. Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdarchy Steve, and today I'm joined by
Narcus Ted, how are you doing this fine and lovely evening, sir?
I'm doing good. We are here to talk about Desolate Wastes and Dungeons and Dragons. Specifically, we're going to be talking about our campaign settings, Other Skies and Under the Dome, and also a little of Zoo Mafia. We're going to break it up into segments like we did last week. And at the end, if you guys have questions, we can grab your questions and delve into them and answer them. Um, with that, let us jump into Desolate Wastelands, Other Skies. So,
All right,
Ted,
so this one here, takes a very big turn. I'm trying to find the document here. Uh, when we're looking at Ether skies, and you take the concept of desolate wastes, there's a lot to really unpack. Even though, like, when you think the term waste, you think like this expansive landscape. But with Ether skies, it's a skyscape that you're mostly dealing with. So it kind of has to take another twist on, word usage.
here's the thing. The thing with Other Skies is something a long time ago really bad happened. So bad that everyone fled the surface world. And, peeling back the curtain a little bit, like, we know when the 13 cities were risen, um, through the use of magic and etherfice, they created a seal that locked away eldritch horrors that were trying to infiltrate this world. Um, and the cities themselves kind of make up the sigils and the seals. But in addition to that, like, what else happened, right? So, like, we've played a little with, the surface world being explored, and the game starts off with, it's just a really bad place, and expeditions down there don't last very long. um and they only go down for short times, and when they do, they try to be off the surface before nightfall, because that's when the really bad things happen. So yes, there's a skyscape, but the skyscape is actually kind of the safe space where the desolate wasteland is everything on the ground, right? Now, it may not necessarily be the same as like what you think of as a wasteland when you're thinking of deserts and marshes and things of that nature, which all of those could be on the surface, of course, because it's a world like any other. But the biggest problem in Other Skies with the surface is the fact that it's kind of been overrun by monsters, right? Like that is the reoccurring theme and story that comes back. Horrible things come out at night and take away the people that live there or murder them.
Well, if anything, I've seen from movies, if there are monsters and we have to fight them, shouldn't we go get aliens?
Well, you could try that, but I'm not sure if that's going to work out in the long run. Because then
But jo-
I think you're
joking
just going to have to fight aliens after you fight the monsters.
but joking aside, you're absolutely right. But it's not just, monsters. You have to look at what happens when you remove the people element from nature. Nature does what it wants. So, like, I imagine, there are grandiose, plants that are just as much a hazard as a hulking monster that might be, lurking under the ground and what have you. Um, you could have things that are, absolutely warped by, the energies of, these eldritch beings that have, subtly leaked power through these gaps that have managed to happen over the years. So, like, here's where you could take all of your monstrosities and aberrations, come up with, hordes of new ones and just be like, all right, well, you know what? This is my version of what a squirrel used to be, and now it's something else. And over here, this is a horrible death cat and whatever. Come up with all of these great things to just terrorize people, knowing full well that there's not a check you can make, because once you step down, off that Aether ship and you're on the ground, you don't know anything about what's there. There's no setting up a defense. There's no, oh, it's a troll, I have to use fire. Because even if somebody knew something from 10 years ago, that might be old news. That might be, now an advantage to said creature who's had, generations of growth to take something that was its weakness and now turn it into a strength.
Well, as Jeff Goldblum said in Jurassic Park, life will always find a way. And
Life away.
and so, you guys have played in other skies and you've actually experienced some of that. There were things living on the surface that weren't necessarily hostile, and they came up with their own mechanisms for, surviving, what is, an eldritch horror wasteland, right? Like that's the real problem, is that there's so many monsters, and things that wouldn't have been monsters before have been corrupted to the point where they might as well be monsters. The two underlying themes in Other Skies when it comes to the world itself is corruption and hostile magic, right? Like, and the fact that the hostile magic also is kind of the thing that sustains the cities, right? So it's this give and take. And when you guys actually went to the surface, you encountered, several different things. You found things that were actually friendly. There was two different groups that figured out ways to survive. You found, like, for for lack of a better description, they were basically like miniature stone giants, or maybe intelligent stone golems, right?
Right.
And they were monks that were cloistered in a monastery, and there weren't many of them left, and they've been dwindling, and they just been kind of hunkered down, trying to preserve what lore they have of old, some of the old religions. That was one of the things you encountered. And then there was another group of creatures that were kind of living their best, like, Ewok life. That when you fled into the forest, these creatures actually found a way to survive the forest, and not only that, uh, keep out some of the more hostile creatures, corrupted creatures. There was definitely a hive mind, a psionic baboon creature. I may have drawn some inspiration from the Sioux monster from first and second edition of Dungeons and
Sure, sure.
Dragons. But they're also kind of like grouped. They don't have a very large vocabulary, and all they would say was Krizak, and which was funny because, well, it was funny to me anyway, because one of the players' names was Krizik,
Chris.
and he kept saying, "Are they saying my name?" I'm like, "No, your name's Krizik. They're saying Krizak. It's completely different." Um, and but you guys ended up having to flee these creatures into this
Yeah,
forest.
they whooped us pretty hard from what I remember.
Yeah, psychic monkeys are a pain in the ass. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, right? And you guys only explored a tiny bit of the world too, right? Like, that it was an arboreal halfling society that you guys are actually kind of, I think, rescued, maybe captured by for a little bit, until you guys were able to befriend them. And they actually kind of assisted you and helped you guys kind of heal up, and it kind of set you on a path, which was like an old road that led to what you guys were looking for your goal. But, like, those were the only two things that you guys found on the surface world that weren't completely hostile towards you immediately.
And but to have anything, you know, else, like, would take away from the concept of, the wasteland. And it's always good to be able to put role-playing encounters in places where you think only hazards and combat are going to exist. And that's one of the great things about GMing, is to be like, oh look, I'm going to put this here and shock my players. um but at the same time, you can't always expect it, because then it's expected and it's not a
Yeah.
surprise. um you know
Finding the
so
balance.
right, finding the perfect balance is what you need to be able to do. But you also have resources down here. So like, beyond the fact that there's meat, whether it's edible or not, to transport it back to cities. But there are, ore that can be mined. There's, lumber that is so precious for flying vessels, to just be like, all right, here you're going to get, the most amount of wood easiest, if you can survive the landscape to be able to do it. So like, it's a competition, not only for you to fight off the other things that are there, but the fact that other cities might be sending, these scavenger parties down at the same time. So like, it's almost like a land dispute, because it's like, all right, well, I wanted that tree, well, so do I. What do you do? How do you handle it?
Yeah, and one of the other things we established is the surface is where criminals get sent. That
This is
are beyond rehabilitation, and it is almost a death sentence, but not quite.
And this is the thing that, when I'm looking at the notes, was the most intriguing to me. My first, first birth thought was, all right, that's the game I want to. I want to, drop my players on the surface. Like, sure, we're playing Ether Skies, but fuck the sky. You gotta survive. Can you make it down here? Can you find allies? Can
So
you find shelter?
Ted,
Can you find a way to sustain yourself? Uh, you know, Maybe until you can find uh, a scavenger faction that doesn't go to your city and convince them to take you up, or take over their ship, or sneak aboard their ship. Like, find a way off. Like, there's so many different options and avenues that death could just be it, but doesn't have to be.
so are you saying, Ted, that you can take the skies from us?
I can, yeah, yeah.
I was also thinking, because last week we were talking about this idea that while we were going to make this our own setting and come up with our own things in the future, but for now, as we're playing, it's just easier to use what's already there. And we were talking about creating you wanting to play a Haragon. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't want to really create a world where every single D&D species necessarily exists, right?
Right.
And so, but I was like, well, what if we kind of did this umbrella of beastkin or beast folk, and they've got some level of corruption to them already, which definitely going to work into a complication for those characters in the game. Um, both like, I'm thinking like they're going to be able to be more resistant to corruption, but also already start with corruption.
Sure.
So there's a bit of a double edged sword, but and it's not that you're a Harrigan. You're not going to be a Harrigan because there are Harrigan that exist, but because, well, that's what the corruption did. It made you a beast-like creature. In this case, a hare or a rabbit. But you could do the same thing for minotaurs, gnolls, bugbears. Any of the more monstrous type races or species in D&D. We'll just fold them into that umbrella. Just like, I know one of the players wants to play a Warforged, and I'm like, well, you can use the Nomaton or the Warforged, but you're just going to be a construct, and we'll just use those stats for now. So we come up with something for the setting itself.
and as far as Beastkin, like I had a fantastic idea, that you know helps out the whole concept as a whole. Like, all right, I'm always someone I like to play characters that look different, that stand out. I want to do things that are not like, oh, I get to be a human that walks around all the time. I want to be something that doesn't look like that, doesn't act like that. So I had this concept of like, okay, well, sure, under D&D rules, you can play insert this strangely looking race. But when you're looking at, say, a beastkin, like it doesn't necessarily have to be a single animal trait. Or it doesn't have to be like a whole cloth. Okay, you want to play a tabaxi looking thing. Well, in D&D, okay, you're a whole cat person. Well, what if you want in Aether skies? Well, what if I just have, as they do with the costumes, I've got ears and I've got a tail. That's it. Other than that, I look human, but that's what you got. You can go everywhere you want on that spectrum. It's still blatantly obvious to anybody who looks at you. Like, sure, you might be like, okay, well, if I stuff my ears underneath a hat and I put on a coat, you can't see the tail. Okay, now I look human. All right, that's fine. That's a way to hide your complication. But to me, it's a lot of fun to be able to offer up the option to the player base to say, okay, you want to be this thing, but be in full control of your sliding scale, go for it. And like, to me, that makes me, happy to be able to offer that up.
Yeah, so and that's the thing. Beastkin will pilot or whatever you decide to call it will be kind of a spectrum, right? And but I feel like on the surface, that's where there's going to be more of a concentration of them. And they've adapted to living down there. It could even be that that's what's happened to the folks that weren't able to escape into the skies, right? And in other skies, we have the surface world, but we also have the return city of Haven, which was knocked out of the sky 100 years ago, and then mysteriously returns, shrouded in gloom. And the expeditions have gone there, have not come back. And since I've played a couple campaigns with it now, um, in the campaign that you guys played, you guys kind of ended it by sealing, replacing the seal at the very end, from the surface. My other group, they actually ended up having to go into Haven and fight your characters as NPCs, and then like stop the Eldritch Horror for coming through, and
Mm-hmm.
and seal it that way. Um, but the city itself is pretty desolate, right? There's nothing there but horrors. And in that campaign, I used what I call dark riders, and it was basically objects that had these psychic beings attached to them, and handling the objects was how a dark rider would attach to somebody and take them over, and just would transform them into these horrendous things. They kind of look like living ghouls, um,
Okay.
and and their primary attack was they would shoot their tongue out, and it would open up like a kind of like a suckerfish, like an algae eater, and
Mm-hmm.
attach to people, and it begins siphoning off their life force.
Damn,
Yeah.
that's kind of.
Well, when you realize what I just reskinned a monster when I made those. So it was basically a mind flayer, and instead of doing their psychic blast, they would do that. It would have like the same effect on the individual, which is a lot of that. A lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh,
Uh, so for other skies thus far, we have two desolate wastelands. One is flying in the city, and one is on the surface world. The question is, where will the players want to explore? Or will they get stuck exploring? they play intense campaign, they sound like they're just gonna be stuck living on the surface, trying to overcome, and just survive the horrors that are existing there. Where I also agree that, like, because of the corruption, it probably just doesn't affect the the fauna, but the flora as well. So next up, let's talk about Under the Dome and exploring the desolate wastes in that D&D campaign setting.
So this is another one that we've spent quite a lot of time with, and you've been pretty much the central GM for, but it's something that's we've had an absolute blast exploring and playing within. Pretty much right outside our dome, outside of Crystalia is the Sea of Blades, which to me is absolutely fabulous to have this, plains that are full of grass that are uh pretty much like sharp as razor blades.
Yeah, like, so the thing about Under the Dome, right? Under the Dome is virtually all wasteland. Like, that's kind of the premise. It may come in some different varieties and different flavors, but at its core, it's inhospitable, very difficult to survive. And I guess I have a type because, again, we have chaos magic that kind of runs rampant and has kind of destroyed the world. And it is it is kind of hostile, not in the way Other Skies, Aether is hostile, where it wants to be used and it wants to burn you out. Uh, in Under the Dome, the chaos magic takes shape in what we call chaos storms, and where in Other Skies, I feel like it almost feels sentient, like it has a will of its own. Not so much in Under the Dome. It's it is just a force of nature that comes and transforms things. And the adventuring party has experienced a couple chaos storms at this point. And they're just random effects. Sometimes summoning monsters, sometimes turning random things into crystal form, which then can be turned into grind or made into a religious icon if that's what you want to do with it. Um, they did have one effect where all of their magic items activated at the same time, which made them very unhappy because if it was a single use item,
It was gone.
it was gone. And if it was something with charges, it just had one less charge. Not as big a deal. Uh, but they lost a fortune in scrolls and potions, I think. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, one of the players, all their gear was teleported like a mile away, leaving them sitting there naked.
That was amusing.
Less so for the player's character, but the rest of
Well, thankfully it wasn't me.
yeah, the rest of the adventurers had fun with it. You know, so no matter what flavor of wasteland you're in that setting, under the dome, chaos storms can happen anywhere. So it's just an added thing that you have to be worried about and concerned about. Um, like when I think in that same storm, also a huge chunk of the land broke off and became a floating island essentially. And some of you are like, this would be great. We should make this our base. And then other people are like, yeah, but what if another storm comes through and unfloats it?
It was like, well, we don't have our own bubble.
Yeah.
How are we going to protect ourselves from the dome? Now, mind you, you have to understand the characters in this particular adventuring party. Out of the five of us that started this thing off, four of us started with either an 8 or a 10 strength. Sorry, intelligence. We had 2 8s and 2 10s, and then we had the artificer who started at like a 16 or an 18. And it's like, yeah, this is not going to be, mind squad.
Yeah.
And random treasure wound up, giving us a headband of intellect. So now there's, somebody in the party with a 20 and somebody in the party with a 19. So we're a little bit more thought out with our plans and grounding. but that doesn't necessarily stop the barbarians fighters from charging headlong into trouble.
No, no, it doesn't. Yeah, so you guys have dealt with the Sea of Blades, where if you're not wearing enough armor, you just take damage for moving through it. It also, really changes the landscape as far as the fauna, because only things that aren't going to be affected by the blades of grass are going to be found there, right? They either have to have a way of avoiding it, or a way of it not affecting them, enduring it. You got one of the main things you guys had dealt with there with Thrycreen, and their hard caprous shells were able to deflect the blades of grass. You guys had modified your grind mobiles to help with that somewhat as well, to keep the blades of grass off your legs. I think that was something you guys had modified early on. Basically made covers that your legs kind of went in, like shields for them.
Yep.
Um, so there's also, like, right around the city itself, you guys, there's the petrified forest, which is uh redwood like trees. It's a forest of redwood like trees, but they've all been petrified. They're all made of stone, or maybe they were stone before. So in that environment, there's going to be um less of the natural things that you're going to rely on for survival, right? It would almost be like you would need the skill set that it would take to survive in the mountains or crags or barrens, more so than a forest, because
Right.
while you will get shade, there is no sustenance to be gained from
Right.
stone trees.
Right. You're not cutting it down to start a fire. There's not going to be, squirrels climbing up and down to, hunt.
Uh,
It's petrified. It's,
uh,
it's not growing.
right. Or although you might be able to build a log cabin that the big bad wolf can't blow down.
Well, I
I
would
believe
take a awful lot of stone cutting checks
it
to
would,
get that.
but I believe that is the big bad wolf's weakness.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
So there is also the Wailing Waste, and it basically is full of uh these giant cacti that when the wind blows through, it makes these eerie sounds. That's why it's called the Wailing Waste. And that is kind of a little bit more deserty. And all of this is like within miles of the city. It's not even like you're going that far and you're encountering these different biodomes. Uh, and then there is the Sea of Woe, which you guys have not explored that at all yet, but it is not regular salt water. It is just made of acid, which backwashes into the bog of eternal acid, which you guys did have to explore and go into, and I
We
believe,
had to we had to find a way to cross
yeah,
twice.
and you did receive some acid burns for your troubles,
Oh
and
yeah.
and also you discovered that apparently trolls that live in and near the bog of eternal acid are not affected by acid.
Yeah, big shocker. Who'd have thought? Um,
So, what are your thoughts about? Because I know you're also kind of working on some of your own under the dome stuff. Have
yeah, so like I got started this past weekend, so like everything is in um, like preliminary stages. Um, but I wanted to take my own dome. And I said, far to the west. Don't even know how far, but long enough away that, it's going to go past all the hazards and stuff that you've already, have already talked about. You're going to have to go through two or three of them at least before you're going to get over to, the Dome of Valeria, where there it's in the midst of the black sands. So the chaos storms, while they're unpredictable everywhere, they are much more common in Valeria, because the skies overhead roil with clouds most of the time. They've had to find other ways, usually through magic, to actually, produce light and produce daylight to actually have crops and what have you. Um, you know, but you've got these sands that, it's not hard packed soil. It is desert like, so that, most wheeled vehicles aren't going to function the same way. So like, your vehicles that would be deployed out of Balearia are probably going to be a little bit different than what you might else see. Um, but it's attracted, or it's manifested this type of metal that actually absorbs the chaos magic. So it has the ability to kind of change what the setting is in this place, as opposed to having to, go harvest grind. You could have this, almost energized metal be like a battery. I say, all right, well, let's put my battery out and hope the lightning strikes it, not me. To kind of charge it. But I wanted to make a custom material for the world that wasn't just like, oh, let's make something that's good at magic items and that kind of stuff, but it'd be something that's more industrial use for the setting. And it's actually what the dome is comprised of, this weave of Balerium, uh, which is this uh, let's see here. So it appears as a dark, almost obsidian-like metal with faint swirling patterns that shimmer violet and crimson under certain lighting. It's smooth and cold to the touch and has a density similar to steel, but with a strange elasticity that resists deformation. So it's a little bit weirder to deal with, and therefore you also kind of have to know how to work it. Um, you know, there's complications where that's concerned. Um, but I like coming up with new metals and things. And just like you've got your Kreen, I've got my own set of monstrous humanoids that lie out in the waste that don't seem to have as much problem with the chaos storms as those living in the dome. But I'm happy with what I've got with them so far.
Nice. And we were talking about this a little bit Saturday night after our Zoo Mafia game, where to me it kind of just sounds like um, where where Crystallia is designed to repel chaos magic and keep its effects at bay. Um, the city you're working on, your dome, is to me almost seems like a lightning rod, where it's
Yeah.
attracting it to absorb it. And I could also just like see like in my mind like like the storm effects and the energy being released, and like lightning strikes like striking for a distance, and like almost like a straight line heading towards the dome itself, as it like strikes the ground over and over again until it gets to the dome, and it starts getting absorbed to the dome. So almost it seems like in some ways the area just outside of your dome might be even more hostile, because of the fact that it's constantly drawing the storms to it.
Yep. Yeah, that was my kind of take on it. Um, you know, I've loved the concept of our chaos storms that we came up with, and we've used them from our Ulfgania games for years, and to really have them play a much larger role in Under the Dome, um, is a really important thing to me. So I'm like, well, if I'm going to create a section of the world for me to run in, play in, what have you, let me really layer in thick. And like I've got what I would constitute as chaos elementals that I've taken, like unpainted minis that were supposed to be either like clear or invisible, or air elementals and painted them up in what I would call like the chaos magic paintbrush. Very violet and purple as a base, but then other colors swirling within. So like at any moment's notice, if I needed, I could go anywhere from a large to a huge chaos elemental and just plop that down on the battle map and say, boom, deal with it. And I've loved it. So
So you're saying because you have the black sands that surround your dome, that wheeled vehicles are probably going to have a difficulty. So are you thinking maybe like tracked vehicles, like tanks almost?
my thought pattern was to do two different options. Was to have more more tracked things like your tanks, or to go in a more quadrupedal type scenario. Like, you want construct mounts essentially. Just to give people the option for doing something different. uh you know but you there's nothing to say that I couldn't take, with magic at its core. Let me take a car, and as opposed to using tires, I'm gonna put, quadrupedal legs on it and have this thing, run. Like, sure, it looks ungainly and weird unless you get the movements right, but I think it would be hysterical to have this kind of option and to be like, okay, well, these things are made to not be affected by the sands. Um, so I want to make
What?
individualized vehicles in both, as well as group vehicles in
Yeah.
both.
Well, what about like I kind of dig the idea of that they literally just made steeds, but mechanical ones. Yeah, so like I'm envisioning the iron steeds, except for they look like camels.
So like that option to me is okay. It can be personalized however you want.
Yeah.
Like, you know, do you want a face on the front of your ride, if you will, and then what do you want that thing to look like? Like, that's like, look at bikers these days. They love, personalization. There are people who spend thousands and thousands of dollars to, you know get their rides pimped out with, lights and colors and spinning thises and what have you. So in a desolate wasteland of under the dome, why wouldn't the affluent people not do the exact same thing? Why would you not have it be, you know, decked out the way you want it to look?
So how far out? How far do the sands extend around the city?
I have not gotten that far. Uh, I started off with the concept, and I made the ruling council for the city. I made the monster and said, okay, I have other things I need to get done. And then before I knew it, my weekend was over and I had to get back to work.
Hear me out. Boats on skis.
Okay.
So they sail across the black sands. And maybe like their mast is made of that same stuff. So
Okay.
and
All right.
and also like woven into the sail itself, or maybe the sail is actually made out of plates of Valerian. Is that what you're calling it?
Valerium, yeah.
Valerium. Yeah, plates of Valerium, and so the whole thing, is kind of powers it. Um, Now maybe they have these ships that go out just for that purpose of getting like filling like smaller arcane batteries, as opposed where for more for private use per se than what the city's using it for.
Okay. Sorry, I'm taking notes because I like the idea. I don't want
Um,
to forget.
but then also I was thinking like they could do like yacht races. And also like you could have different like there could be like larger and smaller vessels like maybe wealthier citizens actually own yachts and take the yachts out almost like pleasure cruising. Whether they compete by racing or they compete by who can gather the most energy, who can have the largest cast bolts strike their vessel. Almost like like kind of like thrill seekers, but they're still kind of safe.
Yeah, I definitely dig all of that. I have not I had not contemplated um making a sand port for yachts when I
Hey, hear me out.
construct.
Black sandworms, right? Is one of the hazards. And here's my thoughts.
All right.
They created the dome in the city as a way to one to harness the energy of the chaos magic, and also to stave off the ill effects of the chaos magic. But there was an unintended consequence. The black sands weren't always there. The black sands exist from chaos storm after chaos storm whipping through towards the city, and year after year as time goes on, the sands expand further and further uh as the more chaos storms are drawn towards the city. So they
Okay.
so they also kind of trap themselves unintentionally.
All right. So the worms are being attracted to this place because of the sand,
Well, no, no,
or
no. The worms themselves are just something that lives there, right? Either they evolved or they were transformed, but the sands themselves are a side effect of them using Balarium to attract and harness the chaos storm.
all right. Now I gotta acquire some stuff to do some black sandworms to add into my
It'll
collection.
it'll give you a new mini for you to craft or mod or paint as well. Or, or
Yeah,
or just make them the Beetlejuice worms.
I,
That would be so funny to constantly be talking about the black worms or the black sandworms and how dangerous they are, and then your players finally like encounter them, and that's what you drop on the table. Uh, but yes, these are some of the dangers of the desolate wastelands of Under the Dome. Next up, we're going to talk about some Zoo Mafia. And so, Zoo Mafia, what is a wasteland in Zoo Mafia? It's not what you're thinking, right? The wasteland in Zoo Mafia is actually filled of daylight and people.
yeah, it's really the concept of wasteland is the thing that is scary, that is world altering, life changing terror. And for the core concept of Zoo Mafia of go wild, do crime, and don't let the humans catch you, it's because the humans can't know of the secret world. Now, the way we're currently running on my Tuesday night game, we've removed the human element from this. So, like, there's other things that need to replace that. But for its core concept, the humans are everywhere. They have the ability to be anywhere at any point in time, even if it's night, even if the humans have gone home. You know, Larry, the guy who takes care of the apes, could still decide to come back in because Bobo is sick, and he wants to check on him in the middle of the night because he had a bad dream. You know, you could round the corner and boom, he could be there. What do you do? So if you interact with humans in a way that lets them know what's going on, it is boom, instant. Half your markers are gone. That is severe consequences for the game and can, put you in danger of being ousted like that.
Yeah, so and we've done I've run it I have run at least one session where you guys had to infiltrate an elementary school during the day and nab a inchworm who lives in the apple on the teacher's desk, who is actually an informant for the feds. Uh,
Yep.
so so in that case, it's like you're trying to figure out, how do you navigate this world? In this case, in Zoo Mafia, this hostile world is just normal people going about their day. Because one, like Ted said, you can't let them know that you're not just a regular animal. So that eliminates a lot of the things that you can do. Like when we play Zoo Mafia, the animals they're using crowbars, shotguns, sledgehammers, uh, baseball bats
Dynamite.
wrapped in barbed wire, dynamite, Molotov cocktails, Tommy guns, right? And that's just not going to fly during the day. So now you have to figure out other ways to interact with the world and accomplish your goals. So to me, one of the fun things is to plan at least one session where you have this scenario where the players have to figure out how to kind of go undercover as their animals. Matter of fact, it's happened a couple times. There was a hobo, a homeless person encampment that some of the animals were hiding in. They had to try and get in there and not get noticed. That had mixed and interesting results. Uh, and so I think those are the two that I can think of off the top of my head where I've done that so far. But I think like that's definitely something to explore. And now you're actually in the process of running your second Zoo Mafia game. It just doesn't really apply to it because you're doing things a little differently. But what are some ideas for, you know, both from the player side and the zookeeper side, uh, for going into these hostile environments?
So as anytime you're dealing with, crime and adventure, really from any perspective, an element that you might not always get to choose is the time, your time frame. So if you're looking to try and add in a mission to deal with a human element, it's like, all right, well, this is going to happen during the day, and that should worry your players a little bit and concern the characters probably a whole lot because they know that they're in a different situation. They're not going to be set to just be able to fall back on their usual things. So it means you need to play both as a player and a character a little bit smarter. Um, it means that that word marker, might have to get thrown out there. Like, okay, well, this check is make it or break it. Well, if I lose, I'm going to lose half my markers. So I'm just going to spend the marker to not lose, to not fail. Um, so you have to be prepared as a player to spend that resource at those crucial moments so that you're not setting yourself up in a bad way.
So, and the other kind of like pitfall too is if you're on a day mission, right? Whether there's humans involved or not, that means your enclosure is empty. You're not where you're supposed to be. What are the chances that zookeepers come hunting for you and looking for and try to figure out where you are? Or, if they don't see you in your closure, maybe they search your enclosure, and do they find something strange there, like a stashed barrel of peanut rum, your spare revolver, human clothes for that matter.
That can greatly change the thing. Now, we as players, like, we've left a lot of that stuff uh untouched, because it's like, all right, well, a lot of Zoom Mafia as we played has been hand wavy. How do you use guns, or how do you put on clothes? Like, we don't care about those things. But we know that there's the secret world that happens at night. So where is all of that stuff stashed? Do you have like an extra room that's really truly hidden that the zookeepers don't really know how to get to it? Or is it just always hidden well enough that you keep it covered, but with enough exposure, it could be uncovered? Like, those are important things to really look at, because it can, lead down a rabbit hole. Now, as a zookeeper, if they don't see you interacting with the stuff, they might be perplexed. But I wouldn't take markers away from you, but it would set up a story for, you're going to now be a little bit more observed, and you need to be more cautious because stuff has been found in your enclosure. Um, but
Do you have a zookeeper that's constantly snooping around now because they
yeah,
found something weird in your enclosure? Yeah.
so it could very well be, oh, well, Larry found it, but it's really all Bob's stuff, and Bob is trying to, you know, keep this away from wherever. And then maybe it's a conversation that happens between Larry and Bob. But, as the animal, you can't really set that up. So it's like, well, how do you make do? How do you plant evidence? Like, and it becomes harder and harder, because it would mean you have to do even more during the day, um, or be really sneaky, get out at night and know where Larry and Bob are, which means you might have to interact in areas near them, which only heightens. It just keeps building if you really want to get into this. So, like, that could literally be like the premise for an entire campaign, a backdrop, if you will, of, you know, a human is starting to notice, or the humans are starting to notice. So you could really be like, I'm going to ratchet up the human factor on this particular campaign, but you still have to do all the other stuff too.
Yeah. Also, it brings up the question too. Will some of the other less scrupulous animals try and weaponize the humans? Right. Um, I feel like most wouldn't, just because they don't want the secret to get out. But there might be some animals that don't care as much, and they're willing to risk it, especially if they can sick the humans on you.
Yeah,
But I feel like that's considered like the nuclear option. That would be a little bit more rare. But if it does come up in the game and it happens, it could have dire consequences, and the players will really have to think fast on their feet, trying to figure out how to avoid that and to deal with the person that's willing to narc to the humans.
yeah. To take a character like Machine Gun Otto, who is, willing to do all kinds of lengths. He could easily be like, all right, I'm gonna take one of my lackeys that's human enough, put him in a trench coat, and have him go deliver a message. We've, through the games that we've played, we've put our names on a list. So therefore, like, clearly we know enough speech or writing to be able to, kind of get by in their world. So who's to say that you couldn't drop off a note of like, hey, uh, you know, there's something fishy going on in the owlery, or something's not right down by the pigsty. Go check out those warthogs, or go whatever. Whatever place that you want to point the humans, you can fire them like a gun and unleash utter chaos.
Yeah. Well, and also too, the thing to think about from the game stance and the world is how do the other animals perceive that, right? That act. Like, how bad is it if you were to do that,
Oh, I
and
would.
get caught by the other, other mobsters or even regular animals for that matter? Like,
Well, I would. Go ahead.
is it against the law, right? Because we have the flat paws, right, and the paw and the claw patrol, which are kind of like the local law enforcement and federal law enforcement of the animal world. Are these are actually crimes that you would be dealt with for?
I mean, it depends upon what you have set up at your zoo, but I would say absolutely to bring you know humans the knowledge of, like, even leading them to the animal world would be, would have to be a high crime. And that's why whoever's willing to risk it, would have to be, using, the shadiest of folks, and as many beings of shelter as possible away from not getting caught, just because it would have to be, probably worse than, major powers declaring war on each other, because it's it would kind of like, it would be as if, you know aliens have been in our world for decades, like Men in Black, and someone making it completely public. Oh yeah, aliens are here. It would cause mass panic. It would cause, chaos in the streets if they provide definitive proof. Uh sure, there's people that wouldn't believe, but like, the animals are going to go crazy if all of a sudden humans are, nosing in on the animal life that happens at night. Like, they wouldn't know what to do. Like, their world would be changed, and people aren't prepared to have their world greatly changed.
Yeah. So in Zoo Mafia, the Desolate Wastelands are humans essentially.
Yep.
All right. So at this point, if we have some, we still have some time, and we'll stay a little bit later if people have questions. We did have a couple come in earlier. The first one was from Spicy. I'm going to be DMing for the first time. Congratulations. Good job. How do you find monsters for your PCs to fight? Do you use the CR number? I use the CR as a very, very loose guide. Um, and as a more experienced DM, I tend to look at what the party consists of and kind of gauge what they can handle. Um, Now, even if you're not as experienced as we are, you could still do this. Like, and plus, there's no guarantees, right? Like, you might be like, well, you know what? I know this character has sleep, and he could take out a bunch of Sturges pretty easily. There's no guarantee that character will do said thing. And also, like, the CR has been very wishy-washy, and I find it really breaks down at the higher numbers of monsters, because at a certain point, it doesn't really matter how many you increase the monster numbers by, the threat doesn't increase by very much. Yet the CR system will tell you that it's so deadly.
Right. So I would say absolutely using the CR system is a good way to start, and is a good way to learn how to, begin your balancing of combat encounters. But as Dave says, there's always going to be things that you might not have taken into consideration. You know, poor dice rolls on the side of the party, and combined with great dice rolls on the side of the monster, vastly change how a combat is going to go. Oh, your squishy person decides to walk up to the ambush monster and your party decides to let it happen because they want to teach them a lesson. Okay, well, now you've got your wizard being strangled by an assassin vine while half the party twiddles their thumbs. How is the rest of this combat going to go? And
That was oddly specific, Ted.
I've been in that exact situation before. With my daughter's wizard approaching a plant and not knowing what it was, and they were warned, and the wizard just didn't care, and very nearly died. After all, it is called an assassin vine. Now they were wildly beyond what should have been a threat of an assassin vine, but the fact that their wizard basically got put down, and they didn't have like a ready cleric. They're sure they had a paladin, but the paladin pretty much focuses on I kill things, and he was having a hard time hitting that time. So like you've got all of these things going on where like the dice rolls are poor. Meanwhile, the assassin vine is beating the snot out of anything that gets close. It could have gone very poorly for the party. Thankfully, they pulled it out in round 4. But up until that point in time, it was all monster. Um, so you really do have to look at what the swing of things are. So my point of advice: it is always easier to add more monsters than it is to take things and change them once they're on the field. Sure, monsters can run away, but unless there's a reason for it, like if they're winning, they shouldn't just get up and run away because you
We're
want the
beating
party
them so bad. Run away.
to.
Yeah.
So I don't know, as a DM, there are lots of things that you can do. They don't know the monster's hit points until you tell them that it's dead or it's not. So if you need an earlier kill, have an earlier kill. If there were planning to be more, but they're having a hard time at the first 3, you don't need to bring out the second 3. But having things come in waves so that you can have a sense of what this threat feels like. It's a lot easier to deal with and a lot easier to manage because you don't have to do as many things as the DM. You're not controlling 6 creatures this round. It's just 3. Well, maybe they'll kill 2 of them before the next 3 arrive next round, and then you're only controlling 4. So like you've got the ability to have this flow pattern so that you can see what it is that the party has the ability to manage.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of err on the side of caution when you're just starting out as a DM. Like, no, I've yet to have a player complain because an encounter was too easy. Like they may get boastful or brag or whatever, but I've yet to see one walk away from the table angry because they beat the monsters too quickly or too easily. So you can always ratchet things up as you gain more experience, and not just experience in general as a GM, but experience with that particular party, right? Like they might be built in a certain way that you just know they do crazy amounts of damage to single targets, but they're terrible at dispersing damage over large areas, right? So you start figuring out their strengths and their weaknesses, going, oh, if I'm using one big monster, it's actually got to be a little tougher because they really know how to dish it out, or like, oh, if I really want to kind of bog them down, I know a lot of enemies is going to keep them tied up for a little while, just because they do a lot of damage, but they do it to like one monster at a time.
And that's the way it is for like every new DM, every new party, I should say. Like even Dave and I that are experienced, I really need a couple combats to really get a feel for how characters are going to be played, in my games. And the aforementioned, group with the wizard, well, there's 6 players in that party, and three of them over the course of the numerous sessions have decided to swap out to secondary characters. So three of the characters that I had gotten to used to are all now like, nope, we're on the sidelines, we're not playing anymore. They're back in town. Meanwhile, I've got fresh eyes to figure out what these roles are. So like they lost the wizard and they lost the barbarian. So like that's a lot of extra damage that's being that's going out there. So then the artificer left, and it got replaced with two bards and a cleric. So the cleric doesn't do any damage. He's a life cleric, so he's primarily a healer. I think out of like 7 or 8 sessions, I think he's used guiding bolt twice. So it's definitely crazy to be like, okay, you're gonna have to deal with the change. So you got to get used to what it is that your players, your party can deal with every time you sit down with a new story.
And let us not forget your experience with Dr. Kurt, because sometimes players are just really savvy. And Ted just was having a hard time because he's like, I put anything in that can be charmed or frightened or whatever, like Dr. Kurt just makes mincemeat of them. And so Ted's like, I got a plan. And then like Kurt's like, well, my character. What?
That's a counter plan.
Yeah. And Dr. Kurt's like, well, my character, Lucky, opens up his coat. And it's lined with a bunch of silver knives, which he then begins to animate and eviscerate whatever Ted put out there. Death by D4s.
So I've learned that I've adapted over the years. Every time somebody comes up with a new trick, I'm like, okay, all right, well, it's one more thing to remember, one more thing to consider. And I don't turn these things around of like, okay, well, I'm going to use it right back on you guys. Although a couple of times I have. I I'm going to learn of every single character, regardless of how amazing you are. You've got some kind of weakness. You're a paladin with super stats and what have you. Well, you know what? You're even if you've got great saves across the board, dexterity is still going to be your weak point, because you're usually wearing heavier armor, which means even if your lowest stat is there, it's going to be in dex, and you're probably not even going to get proficiency. So yeah, that's what I'm going to target. You've got great things like heat metal for those people that are wearing all of that armor. There's lots of different tips and tricks and things that you can do. And as players get more and more savvy and what have you, you can always come back to those things that are like, all right, how do I make your strength into a weakness? How do I turn the dial up to make you like, oh crap, why did I go in this direction? I was like, all right, you wanted to make a high AC build. All right, well, now I'm gonna, pit, this great gladiator against you, and he wants a one-on-one fight, and he's got some special ability that works really well when he's only fighting one dude. Whatever, there's lots of things that can be done to twist things in a direction you hadn't really seen coming.
So yeah, just play basically, go slow, learn from your mistakes and improve, right? Like and you'll get better.
As we all do.
So Jamie Cooper wants to know, and I don't think we can really help Jamie with this one. What's your thoughts on revised Illrigger class? I'm playing a paladin of 5th level, and I'm about to take the next 5 levels in it. Now I know we reviewed the original one. I don't think I've ever looked at the revised.
I have not seen the revised.
But it's probably on D&D Beyond, so now I'm tempted to look. So at some point we'll have to take a look at that. But it's a pretty beefy class, so I don't think you're just going to jump in there and be like,
yeah. Yeah, it's definitely not a scenario that I'm going to sit there and and read it
So
now.
I do remember when we
Oh,
did go
man.
over it initially, it was pretty powerful.
Yes, the ill rigger is here from
MCDM.
MCDM. There you go.
Yep, our
Uh,
friends over there. So yeah, so can't help you with that one, but stacking paladin with almost anything is kind of good. Uh, especially spellcasters, because more smite.
smite.
Yeah. Original CMH. Don't you want to play in your character's strength into your character's? Um.
Usually, I
Yeah.
mean
Usually,
that's a,
I've seen other people go the other way, but yeah.
sure, but I mean, like there is a huge thing of you know what's the word power gaming and min maxing, make your character the most effective capable. And there's some people that hate that term,
Yeah.
that well, I'm not going to do that because that's a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with making an effective character. That doesn't stop you from being able to get into role playing and what have you. Now I've seen characters made for D&D and other games like it that are like, well, I'm not going to put all of my points together. I want to have a nice even spread across the board so that I'm better off. In Index Card RPG, when I played a couple of years ago, you get, it's the same stats, and you get 6 points. Put them where you like. Well, I put 3 in dexterity, and then I put 1 in intelligence, wisdom, and constitution. And I'm like, well, I don't need strength and charisma. Whereas one of the other players, like, I'm going to put +1 across the board, and we'll just go. Well, they were fairly uniform across, the mat, the game. Whereas, like, for me, like, anytime I did anything Dexy, there was no way I was failing, because like we were only trying to hit a 14 or a 12, and having that additional +2, that was 10% more likely that I was going to succeed, and that's a considerable number. So yeah, lean into your strengths, do the best that's there, but it doesn't prevent you from also doing the RP stuff. It's I don't think they need to be mutually exclusive.
I concur with that. So there you go. Playing to your strengths. Unless your fun is not playing into your strengths, then do that too. Right? There's a lot of different ways to play RPGs, and depending, games like D&D 2 tend to reward you for leaning into them, though. Um, so it's almost quarter after. I don't see any more questions. So until next time, stay
Stay
nerdy.
nerdy.